Yes, it's a method of communication. These plants are really not individuals in the sense that Darwin thought they were individuals competing for survival of the fittest. In fact, they're interacting with each other, trying to help each other survive. Well, I'm a forester, specialized into looking at below ground communities. We've found that these fungi actually will connect one plant to another plant. Okay, so this tree here has got roots growing out everywhere, and as we get further away from the tree, we're more likely to find its roots, the ones that are involved in this trade. This is where the fungi hunt or scavenge for nutrients. So the tree sends down its carbon, it goes through the root system and through into these fungi, and there's an interface between the root cortical cells and the fungal cell that's wrapped itself around that cortical cell, and that's where this exchange goes on. So meters away you can have a plant connected to another plant, and they're just shuffling carbon and nitrogen back and forth according to who needs it. The mother trees we think of as the big old trees. They catch your eye when you walk into a forest. This Douglas fir is about 500 years old. It's a massive tree that will have an enormous network associated with it. So you can think of this as a mother tree. You know, it's in the sense that it's a dominant tree in the forest. It's probably networked into all of the trees all around it, even though they're of different species. So this tree is probably linked over to trees as far as you can see. It's just that there are trees in between that are the bridges for the network. Forest ecosystems are really complex systems, just like the Earth is a complex system, the biosphere. And the way it works is that we have all these parts, and all these parts are working together, like the fungus is working together with the tree. It's a lot like how our brains work. In neural networks, our brains are comprised of neurons and axons, and these neurons are physically related, but they're also, almost metaphysically related, because they're sending messages back and forth and they're building upon each other. It works a lot like a forest ecosystem. So in this forest, the fungus and the tree working together allows lots of structure. That structure is expressed in species diversity or structural diversity of the forest. And that diversity is really what gives the forest resilience. The resilience to withstand unexpected events like a fire that might come through, or an insect, or a windstorm. Well, somebody's going to be left standing because there's a diversity there. Some of the forest practices that we have done pay no attention to the role of these mother trees, or that trees actually will move some of their legacy to the new generation. We didn't pay attention to it. Instead, what we did is we went and cut down those trees after they died so that we could make 2x4s out of them. And we didn't give them a chance to give back to the community, I don't think. So what those dying trees will do is that they will also move resources into living trees, to the young ones coming up before they completely collapse. So it's a transfer, like a passing of the wand from one generation to the next, if we allow it to happen.
All right. What thoughts do you have about that?
Wow.
Did you guys know that trees were connected in that way?
I don't think they are.
Well, I mean, I thought they were connected by roots.
No,
that they are.
Ew.
What'd you say, Lily?
I thought that they were connected. I knew that they were connected by roots. I didn't know it was fungus.
Yeah.
Fungi,
Yeah.
actually. No, it's fungi.
No, it's fungi.
And did you know that they would share things? And
are they not?
Hey, Haley? Yes, Steve?
How come like the two other trees didn't have the brain?
They didn't have the brains?
Yeah, it said like it had the brain on the little thing.
I don't know. Maybe they grow up to have the brains.
Maybe they don't.
I got that.
What?
I guess that.
Yeah.
Do you have a brain?
Yes, Abby? It's the mother tree
Is your brain dead?
helping out the other trees. Why isn't it a father tree? You know,
Because the mother.
fathers are people too.
Yeah, the moms had to feed
Okay.
The moms had
Who
to
does
feed
most of the work at home? The mother or the
Hey
father?
guys, stop talking, okay?
Here is the children.
Rachel?
I just wanted to say that it's probably called the mother tree because if you really think about it from ancient times, mothers kind of are the one to take care of the children. So the idea of a tree, a big tree taking care of a little tree or a weaker tree kind of matches that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It's similar.
Yes?
We learned in 4th grade that like sometimes bigger trees can also have a negative effect on little trees because they take up shade and they absorb most of the moisture, so they're kind of like discarding all the
Huh, yeah. That happens in my yard.
What?
Maybe I don't
We
take
have
care of
one
the
tree.
trees, right?
Ask me a question.
See?
I forgot. I'll raise my hand if I remember.
Hey, so here's a question. How can this understanding of the way that trees interact make a difference in our lives?
Wait, I'm confused when it was talking about, when I was asking of what does it say about the universe of God?
What's geomimicry?
Like, does it connect with different people or something? Biomimicry?
I guess.
What does it say about the universe or God?
Like God can come up with different people? That's all
I
I
said
said.
geomimicry.
I think anybody got an idea on what you think this says about the universe, Abby?
Connected all living things, even different species.
Yeah, perhaps we're more connected to everything than we thought. Please stop talking, kiddies.
That big bound cart.
What?
I'm sorry, I was talking to myself.
Okay. But take the principle, okay, that these mother trees send nutrients to these other trees that will protect them, and I think at the end they were saying, it's going to make a new forest or things like that. How can we apply that interconnectedness principle to our lives or our situation?
Well, it says like, how does it say about the universe or God? If multiple people like start to believe God, and then other people may adopt the ways of Christianity, they make their own denominations, or
So people come together and then they get connected?
yeah, like
In-
trees.
Okay. Not bad. I was thinking that it shows a real system of one strong tree caring for the weaker trees and making a new life through them, and how we could do that in society. When we see people in need, we can
Give them money.
give them resources. I mean, that's what she was saying. The tree gives the other tree resources, right?
Yeah.
And then we're all better off.
Something that I think Father Flanagan did something like that once. There's some quote they said where it's like, children are the future or something. Or like maybe it's like, no, it's something like, by, I don't know, it's just something about how if you change a child, you change the world or something.
Oh, okay. That's a good one.
He's got some big quote.
Yeah. Anybody else? All right, we're going to move on to another interesting subject.
That's how I know it's just mine.
If I could reveal anything that is hidden from us, at least in modern cultures, it would be to reveal something that we've forgotten, that we used to know as well as we knew our own names. And that is that we live in a competent universe, that we are part of a brilliant planet, and that we are surrounded by genius. Biomimicry is a new discipline that tries to learn from those geniuses and take advice from them, design advice. That's where I live, and it's my university as well. I'm surrounded by genius. I cannot help but remember the organisms and the ecosystems that know how to live here gracefully on this planet. This is what I would tell you to remember if you ever forget this again. Remember this. This is what happens every year. This is what keeps its promise. While we're doing bailouts, this is what happened. Spring. Imagine designing spring. Imagine that orchestration. You think TED is hard to organize, right? Imagine, and if you haven't done this in a while, do. Imagine the timing, the coordination, all without top-down laws or policies or climate change protocols. This happens every year. There's lots of showing off. There's lots of love in the air. There's lots of grand openings. And the organisms, I promise you, have all of their priorities in order. I have this neighbor that keeps me in touch with this because he's living usually on his back looking up at those grasses. And one time he came up to me, he was about 7 or 8 years old, he came up to me and there was a wasp's nest that I had let grow in my yard and right outside my door. And most people knock them down when they're small, but it was fascinating to me because I was looking at this sort of fine Italian end papers, and he came up to me and he knocked. He would come every day with something to show me, and he'd like knock like a woodpecker on my door until I opened it up. And he asked me how I had made the house for those wasps, because he had never seen one this big. And I told him, you know, Cody, the wasps actually made that. And we looked at it together. And I could see why he thought, you know, it was so beautifully done. It was so architectural. It was so precise. But it occurred to me how in his small life had he already believed the myth that if something was that well done, that we must have done it. How did he not know, it's what we've all forgotten, that we're not the first ones to build. You know, we're not the first ones to process cellulose. We're not the first ones to make paper. We're not the first ones to try to optimize packing space or to waterproof or to try to heat and cool a structure. We're not the first ones to build houses for our young. What's happening now in this field called biomimicry is that people are beginning to remember that organisms, other organisms, the rest of the natural world, are doing things very similar to what we need to do. But in fact, they're doing them in a way that have allowed them to live gracefully on this planet for billions of years. So these people, biomimics, are nature's apprentices. And they're focusing on function. And what I'd like to do is show you a few of the things that they're learning. They have asked themselves, what if every time I started to invent something, I asked how would nature solve this? And here's what they're learning. This is an amazing picture from a Czech photographer named Jack Headley. This is a story about an engineer at J.R. West. They're the people who make the bullet train. It was called the bullet train because it was rounded in front, But every time it went into a tunnel, it would build up a pressure wave, and then it would create like a sonic boom when it exited. So the engineer's boss said, find a way to quiet this train. He happened to be a birder. He went to the equivalent of an Audubon Society meeting, and he studied, there was a film about kingfishers, and he thought to himself, they go from one density of medium, the air, into another density of medium, water, without a splash. Look at this picture, without a splash, so that they can see the fish. And he thought, what if we do this? Quieted the train, made it go 10% faster on 15% less electricity. How does nature repel bacteria? We're not the first ones to have to protect ourselves from some bacteria. Turns out that this is a Galapagos shark. It has no bacteria on its surface, no fouling on its surface, no barnacles. And it's not because it goes fast. It actually basks. It's a slow-moving shark. So how does it keep its body free of bacteria buildup? It doesn't do it with a chemical. It does it, turns out, with the same dentisoles that you had, on Speedo bathing suits that broke all those records in the Olympics. But it's a particular kind of pattern. And that pattern, the architecture of that pattern on its skin dentisoles, keep bacteria from being able to land and adhere. There's a company called Sharklet Technologies that's now putting this on the surfaces in hospitals to keep bacteria from landing, which is better than dousing it with antibacterials or harsh cleansers that many organisms are now becoming drug resistant. Hospital-acquired infections are now killing more people every year in the United States than die from AIDS or cancer or car accidents combined, about 100,000. This is a little critter that's in the Namibian desert, has no fresh water that it's able to drink, but it drinks water out of fog. It's got bumps on the back of its wing covers, and those bumps act like a magnet for water. They have water-loving tips and waxy sides. And the fog comes in and it builds up on the tips, and then it goes down the sides and into the critter's mouth. There's actually a scientist here at Oxford who studied this, Andrew Parker, and now kinetic and architectural firms like Grimshaw are starting to look at this as a way of coating buildings so that they gather water from fog. 10 times better than our fog-catching nets. CO2 as a building block. Organisms don't think of CO2 as a poison. Plants and organisms that make shells, coral, think of it as a building block. There's now a cement manufacturing company starting in the United States called Calera. They've borrowed the recipe from the coral reef, and they're using CO2 as a building block in cement, in concrete. Instead of cement usually emits a ton of CO2 for every ton of cement, now it's reversing that equation and actually sequestering half a ton of CO2, thanks to the recipe from the coral. None of these are using the organisms. They're really only using the blueprints or the recipes from the organisms. How does nature gather the sun's energy? This is a new kind of solar cell that's based on how a leaf works. It's self-assembling. It can be put down on any substrate whatsoever. It's extremely inexpensive and rechargeable every 5 years. It's actually a company that I'm involved in called One Sun with Paul Hawken. There are many ways that nature filters water, that takes salt out of water. We take water and we push it against a membrane, and then we wonder why the membrane clogs and why it takes so much electricity. Nature does something much more elegant, and it's in every cell. Every red blood cell of your body right now has these hourglass-shaped pores called aquaporins. They actually escort water molecules through. It's kind of a forward osmosis. They escort water molecules through and leave solutes on the other side. A company called Aquaporin is starting to make desalination membranes, mimicking this technology. Trees and bones are constantly reforming themselves along lines of stress. This algorithm's been put into a software program that's now being used to make bridges lightweight, to make building beams lightweight. Actually, GM Opel used it to create that skeleton you see in what's called their bionic car. It lightweighted that skeleton using the minimum amount of material as an organism must. for the maximum amount of strength. This beetle, unlike this chip bag here, this beetle uses one material, chitin, and it finds many, many ways to put many functions into it. It's waterproof, it's strong and resilient, it's breathable, it creates color through structure. Whereas that chip bag has about 7 layers to do all of those things. One of our major inventions that we need to be able to do to come even close to what these organisms can do is to find a way to minimize the amount of material, the kind of material we use, and to add design to it. We use 5 polymers in the natural world to do everything that you see. In our world, we use about 350 polymers to make all this. Nature is nano. Nanotechnology, nanoparticles, you hear a lot of worry about this, loose nanoparticles. What is really interesting to me is that not many people have been asking, how can we consult nature about how to make nanotechnology safe? Nature's been doing that for a long time, embedding nanoparticles in a material, for instance, always. In fact, sulfur-reducing bacteria, as part of their synthesis, they will emit, as a byproduct, nanoparticles into the water. But then right after that, they emit a protein that actually gathers and aggregates those nanoparticles so that they fall out of solution. Energy use. Organisms sip energy because they have to work or barter for every single bit that they get. And one of the largest fields right now in the world of energy grids, you hear about the smart grid. One of the largest consultants are the social insects, swarm technology. There's a company called Regen. They're looking at how ants and bees find their food and their flowers in the most effective way as a whole hive. And they're having appliances in your home talk to one another through that algorithm and determine how to minimize peak power use. There's a group of scientists in Cornell that are making what they call a synthetic tree because they're saying, there's no pump at the bottom of a tree. It's capillary action and transpiration pulls water up a drop at a time, pulling it, releasing it from a leaf and pulling it up through the roots. And they're creating, you can think of it as a kind of wallpaper. They're thinking about putting it on the insides of buildings to move water up without pumps. Amazon electric eel, incredibly endangered some of these species, creates 600 volts of electricity with the chemicals that are in your body. Even more interesting to me is that 600 volts doesn't fry it. We use PVC and we sheathe wires with PVC for insulation. These organisms, how are they insulating against their own electric charge? These are some questions that we've yet to ask. Here's a wind turbine manufacturer that went to a whale. Humpback whale has scalloped edges on its flippers, and those scalloped edges play with flow in such a way that it reduces drag by 32%. These wind turbines can rotate in incredibly slow wind speeds as a result. MIT just has a new radio chip that uses far less power than our chips. And it's based on the cochlear of your ear, able to pick up internet, wireless, television signals, and radio signals in the same chip. Finally, on an ecosystem scale, at Biomimicry Guild, which is my consulting company, we work with HOK architects. We're looking at building whole cities in their planning department. And what we're saying is that shouldn't our cities do at least as well in terms of ecosystem services as the native systems that they replace? So we're creating something called ecological performance standards that hold cities to this higher bar. The question is, biomimicry is an incredibly powerful way to innovate. The question I would ask is, what's worth solving? If you haven't seen this, it's pretty amazing. Dr. Adam Neiman. This is a depiction of all the water on Earth in relation to the volume of the Earth. All the ice, all the fresh water, all the seawater, and all the atmosphere that we can breathe in relation to the volume of the Earth. And inside those balls, life over 3.8 billion years has made a lush, livable place for us. And we are in a long, long line of organisms to come to this planet and ask ourselves, how can we live here gracefully over the long haul? How can we do what life has learned to do, which is to create conditions conducive to life? Now, in order to do this, the design challenge of our century, I think, we need a way to remind ourselves of those geniuses and to somehow meet them again. One of the big ideas, one of the big projects I've been honored to work on is a new website, and I would encourage you all to please go to it. It's called asknature.org. And what we're trying to do in a TED-esque way is to organize all biological information by design and engineering function. And we're working with EOL, Encyclopedia of Life, Ed Wilson's TED Wish, and he's gathering all biological information on one website, and the scientists who are contributing to EOL are answering a question, what can we learn from this organism? And that information will go into asknature.org, and hopefully any inventor anywhere in the world will be able, in the moment of creation, to type in, how does nature remove salt from water? And up will come mangroves and sea turtles and your own kidneys. And we'll begin to be able to do as Cody does and actually be in touch with these incredible models, these elders that have been here far, far longer than we have. And hopefully with their help, we'll learn how to live on this earth and on this home that is ours, but not ours alone. Thank you very much.
Have you guys heard of that before?
No.
No?
Wow.
I didn't quite get it either, sorry. Maybe that's my problem with these seminary classes. I just can't. I didn't get it.
Well, I've heard of people deciding really fast things up there.
Some basic, some don't.
Yeah.
So what did you think of that? What do you think of the idea that there's sometimes problems to be solved by looking at the way nature handles it? I really like that quote. When you have a problem, you think, how does nature solve this? And they were looking at a lot of mechanical problems, but I think it could apply possibly to other areas. What do you think? Do you think you could apply that? How would nature solve this to a different kind of problem?
I mean, a mental problem. Like if you're, I don't know,
Are you talking
like
medication or?
whatever. Well, no, not really. Like, there's more natural ways to do things. Like, we watched a video on it in language arts. I think it's science. I don't remember. And then it was about how like people are using like old like tree barks in different parts of the world instead of like chemically combined medicine to try and like solve pain and like other things, and that's how nature helps us.
Cool. Anybody else? Yeah.
I feel like this video was one of those videos where I'm like, life, God created life, but and it's one of those things where you realize, hey, it's so intertwined things. There's no way that these things happen without
Mm.
there being a greater power, because everything is just right, like I said. Like the eel, how does the eel not destroy itself? That's gotta be,
So for you, this concept is a kind of indicates a higher power
yeah.
that a God exists.
Because, again, she said,
Intelligent
life
design.
does this.
Mhm.
There are times when she was using life as an abstract form. There are two instances where I can
Yeah. What was your favorite thing that they were working on? The bullet train? Yeah. Did you see the picture of the woodpecker and the hammer?
The hammer? Yeah.
Yeah.
What happened to the hammer?
They like bent it so that
They
it
tried
would
to
look like a woodpecker.
shape it like a woodpecker so it'd be more effective and efficient. You know, how many times have you ever hit a nail with a hammer?
Like,
It's so much
four.
fun.
I mean, I did
You
it
have?
once, but I.
How many times do you have to hit the nail till it goes into the wood?
Like depends how hard you hit it, but
Depends on
I
what
don't want
it
to
is.
break
It depends
it.
on
Probably
what it
like 3 to 2.
2 to 3? 2? So you take a nail and you're like, bam, bam, it's in. Most people, I would say, it's probably more than that. Abby?
Get in, like a child at a time, would probably do 5
Yeah, so most of us would be, or I've seen people even hold the hammer right by the head and hit the nail 27 times. And most of us would have a straight hammer and do this kind of motion where there's no, no wrist action, and that's totally inefficient too. But a shape like this and a swing where your wrist breaks, you could probably get it in too.
Your wrist is gonna break?
What?
You said where your wrist breaks.
Well, break, I mean like this. Instead of being a stiff arm, you, yeah, all right. One more, this is a really interesting one too.
Is this one about imagined cells?
She has all 10.
The wonderful part about nature being fractal is that we can use patterns in nature to understand other patterns that exist because patterns repeat themselves. So now if you want to look at a pattern that's playing itself out on this planet right now that will give us insight about what is going on. So I say, look inside a caterpillar that's growing. And a caterpillar represents, let's say, 7 billion cells living under the same skin. Each cell is a citizen. And guess what? They're like people like us. They're working every day. Cells in the digestive system are taking the food and breaking it down and making products out of it. Some cells are the motility cells. Those are the cells that move the caterpillar around. The structures of like our highways with trucks and vehicles carrying materials all over the place, something like that. Cells of the immune system are taking their job of protecting the system. Respiration system is making sure fresh oxygen is being delivered. So all the cells have jobs. The caterpillar's growing. If you were in there and a reporter, you look around going, yeah, the economy is going great guns. It's growing every day. Everybody's working, full employment. This is the kind of thing we love to see. How much are we growing every day? Some percent every day. And then the caterpillar reaches a certain stage of growth. And at that stage of growth, it just stops eating. It can't take it anymore at this point. It's reaching a maximum size. Then if you're a cell inside that community, imagine what would happen. That you're on the job and all of a sudden there's less food coming in and you're a digestive cell. You say, well, man, the work is slowing down here. The factory is slowing down. Then all of a sudden it gets to such a low level that many cells get laid off of the job. Now their cell's not working. Why? There's not enough food coming in to keep them all working. And as the food shuts down, then the other jobs are affected because if there's no food, then there's no energy. And all the systems start laying off cells. And pretty soon, there's massive chaos under the skin of a caterpillar. Why? The systems stop growing, the cells are out of work, nothing is evolving, and the thing is falling apart. If you were a cell in that caterpillar body at that time, you would look around and say, oh my God, our world is coming to an end. And yet, in the midst of those billions of cells, in among them are other cells genetically identical to them, no different. But they think differently. They respond to the signals differently. These cells have the interesting name called imaginal cells. And these imaginal cells come up with new visions. And what happens is, in the midst of all this chaos, when all the other cells are running around thinking the end of the world is coming, the new imaginal cells are laying out new ideas, new visions, a new plan, a new scheme, a new way of life. And around these ideas, the cells reorganize, and they start to create new massive organizations to create something much more fabulous than the previous system. A system that is much more sustainable. It's a system with a higher level of evolution. And that system they're constructing called the butterfly. So there's a transition from an old world of caterpillar with an old belief system and an old way of life that was no longer sustainable. And therefore, you have two choices in this world right now. You can retain your caterpillar status and go, oh my God, the sky is falling, and be in fear. Or you can say, the caterpillar is going, I want to build a butterfly. Why? Because if I become active and, positive in the process of building the butterfly, I'm engaged, I'm working, we're creating the future. If I sit there and bemoan the loss of the caterpillar, then I'm making myself sick and everything around me. Why? I'm not contributing to our evolution. And so, where are we? We're at the demise of the caterpillar stage of civilization and the rise of the butterfly.
That was so weird. Why were they all bloody?
That was weird.
That's what's happening.
A little political.
You know that? That was interesting.
So, last year I watched way too many documentaries. Do you guys ever watch documentaries?
Yeah.
So, a lot of them, paint the world as like, we've got some serious problems. We've been doing things wrong for a long time. And I don't know if you feel that way, that there's a lot of junk going on in the world, you can name a bunch of things, financial part of the world, the fact that there's people that have a lot and then there's people that don't, the climate and the environment, and food can be one. I mean, I watched a few food ones, obviously. And
Did you watch that chicken nuggets for me?
what?
Did you watch that chicken nuggets for me?
Chicken nuggets?
Yeah. Did you see how they were made?
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
I've seen the hot
That's
dog
pretty
ones.
disgusting.
I can
It's
still
so cool.
like, I don't know, they taste the same. They're just like,
So I was watching all these documentaries and I started to get a little depressed, like we have big problems and how are we actually going to solve these problems? And I brought it up in a staff meeting and Eric sent me this video. Eric's our senior pastor here. And and I thought it was really interesting that it's the same genetics in the DNA of the caterpillar and the butterfly. It's exactly the same. And through this process, it's a common process where a caterpillar no longer is a caterpillar and transforms into a butterfly. And obviously, the political implication of this video is that something's going to come along, right? Maybe something already is coming along. And our choice is to either hold on to the old and sort of regret that things change, even though the old is not going to work into the future, or we can embrace the transformation as it plays out into the future. Which obviously a butterfly would be a better way to live than a caterpillar, right?
No,
caterpillar's gonna sit around.
Caterpillar's gonna be lazy and eat fruit all the time.
See, you guys haven't lived yet. I get
They
it.
have to go up and down.
You'd rather be a caterpillar watching Netflix, going to Starbucks. I get it. I get it. Anybody haven't thought about any of that last video? What?
Were the caterpillars humans?
was like laying down on my hand and just
No, the caterpillar
Sort
is
of.
like signaling the world, and like the cells are us, and like that's why it showed protesting, because like there's people in the world that just don't want to work, and they'd rather just go out and break stuff.
It's like a system. Rachel. Hey, we're not done.
If we do kind of let go of the past and move on to the future, that we can be the next great thinker.
The next geniuses.
Yes.
Are we though?
Yeah. So think about on the right. I put a box there that's thinking about what in science for you really proves the existence of God. Like Rachel was saying before, the biomimicry really spoke to her as proving that.
No, it's disproved.
That's the bottom one is disproved, or is the top one disproved?
The top one says.
I want to say what
Oh, the top one's supposed to be what for science for you proves the existence of God. The bottom one should be disproves. Some of you don't even have the right paper.
Wait, are we supposed to have affirmation 10?
Week 2.
Should it have a rainbow on it?
No.
my pen disappeared and I think someone stole it.
Do any of you have a thought on that? What in science for you most points to an intelligent design?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it showed like the windmills and how they took after the don't touch me please. Took after the whales and then like how they lose 32% drag. I think that some of like the most impressive and most like effective things like creations that are created to help the world comes from like inspiration of animals or inspirations of other things.
And you think the inspiration is part of the way God speaks to us?
Sure.
Like give you an idea about a design? Yeah.
Like look at the whale.
It's interesting that they used a whale to make a windmill better, you know?
Because whales can't fly.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Ooh.
Neat. Anything that you've learned about science that you think, oh, there must not be a God then? Anybody have that experience where you learned something? Well, I can see you're all packed up, so we'll see you later.
We didn't have any homework. Yeah, but you know I don't. Wait, do you have these? You just want to go above and beyond. You can do it. You can literally do it. I got my pencil. No, this is a pencil. Anyway.